5 seconds.
Greetings, fellow Earthlings. This is the Great Debate Community Channel, and I'm John Peterson, your host for this evening. And this is a channel brought to you by Steve McCrae. I always want to start at the top by thanking Steve for allowing me to do this each week.
Jerry,
you have the stream on. You need to turn that off.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah. You can't listen to the stream because there's a delay.
Yeah.
If you're watching on YouTube there. As you heard there, I'm joined tonight by Jerry and Misha Griffith. And as you saw in the title of the stream, we're here to the night before Halloween. I almost said Thanksgiving, the night before Halloween, to talk about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And one thing about the original Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is the monster in that book, if you've read it, is not the monster you're familiar with in all the movies. There's very much different about the book and the iterations that followed it. And so just to start with, I'm going to throw it over to Jerry and Misha, and they're going to kind of outline what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we'll let them take it from there. And I will, as always, be the useful idiot in the room to ask questions. But this is Jerry and Misha's presentation. And go ahead and take it away, Jerry and Misha.
So tonight we wanted to talk about Frankenstein, which is an important 1818 novel about the relationship between humans and society, about the failures of the Enlightenment and the growth of the Romantic era.
Absolutely not. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is a novel of great proportion that talks about feminism and alienation and how it felt like to be a woman in the early 19th century.
This is a tale of hubris, which was the central Greek sin of the Greek tragedies. And Mary had read the Greek tragedies. This is about what happens when a man puts himself on the level with the gods.
As you can probably notice, even though this book is 200 years old, we're still arguing about it because it is such a fantastic read.
That sounds like the makings of a great debate.
Yep, it does.
Do we have a community?
We do.
Excellent. Hi, community.
There's 13 of us. Hello,
All right,
community. We need to go back to, I guess we can use our faces.
We can go back. You want to see us?
Sure.
Okay, so
why not?
Because she's prettier than I am.
Oh, no, the horror. No,
the horror.
No, I'm just kidding. That was so. I'm detecting a little detention in the household over Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Not really. I think part of the magic is the very fact, as we were mentioning before we went live, John, one of the things I love about this book is that what the reader brings to it is a large part of what they take away from it.
Right. And we're coming at it as a historian and a journalist, documentary filmmaker. So we're not coming at it as in terms of your average English literature class. So we're going to be a little bit different than that. We're going to bring you some of the backstory, what made it so interesting. And I think you're going to see some of the history is really very much influential in the book itself.
By the way, there was a recent author by the name of John Lauritsen who published a book called The Man Who Wrote Frankenstein, in which he argues that Mary wasn't smart enough to have written this book. And so it had to be written by her husband, Percy Shelley. And that it's really secretly about gay relationships.
Right.
And that's the whole point. Now, much of the book is about feeling like you don't fit in.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge factor in the story. I would love to hear from our audience. You know, how many people are that familiar with the storyline of the book? Anybody? Go ahead and join the live chat and say, just give me have you read it in the last 5 years? Because if not, I'm prepared. We have a short summary. We can go through the plot.
Sure.
Well, and I can tell you right now, and we'll get a response from the live chat. You know, if you've read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein recently, type in 1, and if you haven't, type in 2. But I think that would be a great place to start, regardless of how many people have maybe read it recently, is to give it, because that was the one thing I noticed when I read as much of it as I did, and then researched it, is that the story of the book is very different than the iterations that followed. What is there, maybe hundreds of Frankenstein movies and stories afterwards, in the intervening time between then and now. And
there's even an X-rated version.
Oh, why do you know that?
Because he was supposed to be larger than normal proportion. Never mind.
Ooh, definitely.
How do you know
Big
about
gloves
that,
and
Misha?
big shoes.
Okay. So the storyline, I'm going to run through this real quick. I got this here, Misha, if you want to jump in a little bit.
Sure.
It starts like most novels of the 19th century at the North Pole.
Well, on the way to the North Pole, it actually doesn't start with Frankenstein or the family or the creature or anything like that. Mary Shelley uses a literary vehicle of a Arctic explorer who's about to journey to the North Pole, writing letters to his sister. And so in this fashion, he is able to tell the story as someone else is telling it to him. And someone else is, of course, Victor Frankenstein.
So at the North Pole, first off, the original narrator, Captain Robert Walton, is feeling terribly isolated and alone. Right. I think this is part of the setting of the story, and part of why I do think loneliness and feeling like you don't fit in is a big part.
But he is also obsessed about getting to the North Pole, and he does not care who he has to sacrifice in order to get there.
Yeah, if his crew has to die,
too bad.
It's for science.
It's for science. Yes, he's very much in love with science and hoping to add to human knowledge.
So the crew on this sailing ship looks out and they see a 8-foot-tall man riding by on a sleigh pulled by dogs.
Yes, and they're really quite shocked about that. But as they're discussing it, they find another human on an ice floe, and that is, he's down to his last dog, and he's about dead, and it's Victor Frankenstein. So the crew hauls him into the boat. They spend a lot of time reviving him, and the friendship grows between Walton and Victor Frankenstein, and then Victor Frankenstein tells him his story.
And it's quite a story, but it involves Victor going away to college as a young man. I mean, he has a typical childhood.
Yeah, he opens up with stories of his family and where his mom came from and dad came from, and way too long. But the interesting part starts when he goes away to college and starts studying sciences. But before we get there, he had unfortunately picked up a book as a very young person by Agrippa, who was a 15th, 16th century historian, scientist, scholar, and a doctor of theology, who, interestingly enough, gained his doctor of theology by writing a book about the virtues of the female sex. It was considered, no, not that one.
No, that's the Roman Emperor.
That's the Roman Emperor.
Never mind.
Jerry's Googling something, and he's just Googled the Roman Emperor Agrippa. No, we're talking about the 16th century character. Okay. But this gentleman was accused and almost sent to the Inquisition because he wrote about the occult. And he could read Hebrew, so he wrote about Judaism and the occult, and got in really big trouble because of it. But he also had some very important jobs. But anyway, when Victor reads this as a young boy,
and a few other
his father makes fun of him and says, "No, that's trash. Don't bother reading it." And so when Victor goes away to college, this is, of course, the early 19th century. There are no SATs, there are no GREs, there are no transcripts. He goes in and tells them what he has read, which is, of course, Agrippa and
Albert Magnus.
And the two professors that he's talking about almost throw him out of the office. This is nonsense. This is awful because we have real science now, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So Victor starts his studies in regular science, but he keeps going back to the old books on the occult. And he forms this idea in his head about creating life, about finding the elixir of life. And so he kind of starts skipping class and creates a monster.
So Victor might be considered the first transhumanist.
Interesting term. It's not at all clear.
As far as like transhumanism that wants to, extend life and, through science and all that. He wants to make a more perfect being.
Well, that's actually part of the subtext, is he can't create a perfect being because he's not as full of finesse. And so the monster is oversized. It's not clear what he's doing, because is he digging up body parts and sewing them together?
And he refuses, another literary
device.
He refuses to tell Walton, the captain of the ship, exactly how he does it, conveniently spelling out, well, I wouldn't want anyone to follow in my footsteps. Kind of a dead giveaway that Mary has a little bit of gap between something that she's made up and the knowledge of science of the time. But, I can forgive her for that.
Yeah. Okay, so the point is, Victor becomes obsessed with this. He spends 2 solid years in the top of his apartment in Ingolstadt, Germany, creating this creature.
And when he finally gets it done and it comes to life, he abandons it. He is so horrified by this creation that he runs out of the room and faints. And then he wakes up. He's having a nightmare.
Really creepy nightmare.
And he wakes up and the creature is staring him right in the face, and he runs away. And runs into his friend. Anyway, through a series of happenstances, he finally gets his health back and goes home, but people in his family start ending up being murdered.
Yeah, that ruins your whole vacation, yes.
It ruins your whole vacation. And in fact, not only is his little brother murdered, but the maid seems to be framed for the murder, although a young girl could not have done the strangling that supposedly happened.
Sorry. Anyway, I had a quote here.
Yeah,
okay.
Forget
so anyway,
yeah.
the point is, so what happens is Victor goes home to his family. He realizes that the monster he's created has caused the death of both his little brother and of the maid, who's basically framed for it.
The creature frames the maid.
Because basically the maid is found with a locket that the brother was wearing. She's found with this jewel-covered locket. And so she's framed for it. She's executed.
She's hung for it, yeah.
Victor gets there in time for the trial, but he basically says, I'm not going to say anything because nobody would believe me.
Victor throughout the book. Yes, Victor throughout the book. And this is an interesting part of his character. He is a coward. He truly is a coward. He had a chance to save a woman. He had a chance to admit, yes, I did something very, very wrong. And he cannot bring himself to do it because his pride keeps him from saying, yes, I created a monster.
I know, granted, people probably won't believe him, but even so.
Well, that would be worse, because then all of a sudden he's created a monster. No, he's gone insane. That to him would be worse than actually being accused of creating a monster. Yeah. And of course, the monster has been trying to become a human of its own. We see during the course of the book, he tells the monster tells a story.
I want to jump back into this. Okay.
Oh, you want to jump
Victor goes into this deep depression after the death of both his little brother and the nursemaid. The nursemaid, of course, and this is, I think, critical to the story, is framed, but she confesses to the crime.
Right.
And this is, I think, a critical component of Mary's atheism and so on, is there is a priest who basically tells her, we know you did this. You're going to be executed. If you don't confess, you're going to burn in hell forever.
Right.
So this was a central part of it to me, was the
there's some important
oppressive nature of the church.
Yeah, there's important mixed messages coming from the church in certain situations.
Okay. So anyway, so the family is very concerned that Victor is so upset. It's like, people die all the time. Come on. So they take him on a vacation up to Mount Blanc. which is a portion of Switzerland very nearby. The family's from Geneva, and they go up to Mont Blanc because they wanted some pens. Mont Blanc in Switzerland, absolutely gorgeous scenery. And
is that you, Jerry?
No, alas, it is not. We don't have the budget for me to go to Switzerland for this show. Sorry. Anyway, so they take him on a vacation. He goes out in the woods, and in the process of wandering around through the woods in the glaciers, I'm pausing for a second, there's some beautiful descriptions of the area that are just elegant descriptions of natural beauty in this area.
Yeah, Mary does a beautiful job of describing scenery. It's really nice.
Up there, he runs into the creature, who is now living in an ice cave. And the creature tells the story of his own experience, and how the creature tells how he just wanted to be accepted.
Yeah, he felt abandoned by his creator. And so he tries to fit in with humanity by reading, by listening to people, by learning how to talk. He is formed very much a tabula rasa, a blank slate, because he has no memory of any past life. But he is created as an adult so that he has an adult sensibility.
And he basically finds a place where he can live in this little hovel that has a hole in the wall, and he can watch a family.
Right.
And he eavesdrops on them and learns to speak French from them. I assume it was French.
Don't know.
Anyway, but the
French,
point is,
French, yes.
he picks up on these things, and he's desperate for friendship. He tries to reach out to the family. They beat him up.
Yeah,
because he's so ugly.
So every time he has any interaction with people, it usually turns out to be violent. You want to go back to us?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, we want to see you too.
So Victor finds out what the creature has been up to.
And the creature has sworn vengeance on Victor. Basically, you created me as a misfit. I cannot fit in. I will destroy you. And that's basically what the monster says.
And so the monster spends the rest of the book murdering members of Victor's family, his wife on his wedding night, his best friend, until
Victor agrees to create a mate for the monster.
The idea is if we give this creature, a wife or a woman to be with, maybe he will settle down. And the creature promises to be good and not murder anybody else.
I'll move to South America. I won't bother anybody. I promise. Yes.
But he goes to the Hebrides, and they're traveling all over all this time. This is like a great travel brochure for the European Grand Tour. And they go up to the Hebrides, where Victor starts creating a female creature. He's hauled all of his equipment up there and everything. And he realizes in the middle, this is really bad, because they might procreate and have families of monsters.
Can I comment on something on the live chat, which is from
live chat.
Sarah, who says basically people are idiots. Monster is made up of people's parts. Therefore, monster is an idiot. To me, the story basically shows the monster formed tabula rasa, blank. Whatever process Victor used, he did not get an intact brain from Abby Normal.
No, yeah. There's no memory of a past life, clearly.
And the thing is, too, like you talk about how murderous and everything the monster is, but when he was up in the mountains and observing that family, he learned a few languages. He learned about other things. He became a very intelligent being, but still maintained that homicidal nature.
Or vengeful. And this is actually one of the questions that I have after reading the book is, to what extent is this book about the idea that Mary's family was some of the first true political liberals in the history of the Western world. Okay, the idea that if people are isolated and can't be part of society, do they turn to violence? Is this part of the message of the story?
Right. Are people naturally born bad, or are they naturally born good? This was a huge question during the Enlightenment, and we're going to get into historical periods going on, but let's very quickly finish the story.
Just real quick, as far as what you said about Victor starts second guessing this idea of creating a bride for Frankenstein, and he starts second guessing it because, gosh, not only might they procreate, but then this might create a race of beings that will war against humanity in the future. And he wonders, well, he creates this female monster, and what if she rejects him because of how he looks? And then
that does occur in the text. Yeah. There's that question in the text, yes.
Victor is finally questioning, after all these deaths and mayhem, whether it's a very good idea to do this or not. He gets ethics in the middle of the book. Why he didn't have it in the beginning of the book, well, I mean, that's the way you write characters. But he realizes this is a bad idea and destroys the female monster and rows out into the middle of the North Sea to dump the body. And he gets framed for murder.
Of his best friend, yes.
Well, no, okay. Because his best friend dies, and they assume they have seen him take a body out and dump it, and they assume it was the murder of somebody else, along with the best friend. So Victor Frankenstein gets framed for murder as well. This is all very much the machinations of the creature. This is not happening by accident. And this is part of the really frightening part about this creature. He's smart, he's good, he's fast, he's powerful. He is a very superior creature to these weak, fallible men. He doesn't have to sleep, hardly has to eat, can keep running all day.
Is immune to cold, yes.
Yeah, immune to cold. He's frightening. Never forget, he is not a hapless creature. He is a very scary thing. So what happens after he's framed for murder?
Well, he goes home, and his father bails him out.
Right.
And he marries his childhood sweetheart.
And on their wedding night,
the monster kills her.
Victor goes downstairs and waits for the monster with a gun. Meanwhile, the monster climbs upstairs and strangles Elizabeth, the wife, to death.
Yes.
The father is killed.
The father dies of just broken heart. Just
broken heart.
Which happens in novels. I don't know that it really happens in life, but it is everybody around him has died. Nothing has worked out. His life has gone to hell. I don't know if it happens in real life like that, but in novels it happens a lot.
It can.
He just gives up on everything. Yeah.
Anyway, so the rest of the book is Victor chasing the monster, or monster chasing Victor. It happens both ways. Victor is determined to destroy the monster. The monster doesn't want to be destroyed. So this is why they end up on the way to the North Pole.
Victor is determined to track him down and kill him.
The monster does not want to be tracked down and killed. He's led Victor on chases through Russia, through Central Europe, through Scandinavia.
But to me, this is another central theme, is the efforts to undo your mistakes, which sometimes you just can't do.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've screwed up. And to me, Mary's husband was famously thrown out of Oxford for writing a book called The Necessity of Atheism. But I'm not sure that Mary totally embraced that, because there's a certain religious nature here of, your sins will catch up with you.
It's not so much religious. Mary was very much a creature of romanticism, with the idea that it's not small r romantic, they're in love. Romanticism was a movement of the very early 19th century that was a reaction to the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment idea that everything can be logical and rational. The Romantic period basically said, no, you're leaving out some very important parts, like imagination and curiosity.
And look how beautiful nature is.
Emotion and nature. Nature is a huge part of this book. Every time someone is sick, they have to just go out in nature, and they all of a sudden become well again. That sort of thing. And so eventually Victor dies, and the creature carries him off onto the ice. And Walton, the ship captain...
I'm going to share with you a section that I just copied down this morning.
Which part?
Victor's dying words.
Okay.
Walton, the ship is stuck in the ice, and the crew says, we're not dying for this stupid quest of yours.
Right.
And Victor stands up and gives them a lecture with his last strength and says, nothing worth having comes without struggle and difficulty. Don't you ever give up. You don't want to return homes as cowards. When, at the end of the story, the ship actually is freed from the ice, Victor's dying words are, farewell, Walton, seek happiness in tranquility and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparent innocent one of distinguishing yourself in sciences and discoveries. Mm-hmm. Now, to me, that goes very much to part of what you were saying earlier. But basically, this is kind of the Greek mythos idea. Don't get any big ideas.
Yes.
You are not God.
The sin of pride, yes. Hubris.
Hey, real quick, I want to jump in. Quisa sends a super chat. Thank you, Quisa. Steve, thanks you very much. He says, I seem to recall the creature was inspired by Luigi Galvani's electricity experiments on dead frogs.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Do we want to talk a little bit about Mary's life?
Okay. Well, first,
or do we want to talk about the many ways we can?
Let's give a little. Let's respond to this person because this is a super chat, and they deserve our response.
Yes, and at the time, in those times too, I just learned today from talking to Jim Majors, who knows a lot about this topic and that time period. They used to have parties, and they would bring cadavers in and hit them with electricity and make their body parts move for amusement.
Yes. Mary attended such a demonstration. This exists during her travels, she and her sister kept very detailed notebooks, and they definitely saw a demonstration of galvanism, and which is basically running a current through something and making it wiggle. I didn't know about dead bodies, but I know that, definitely Galvani's experiments were certainly a part of the idea that life could be simulated with electricity. Here's a note from Mary's 1831 instructions. Many and long were the conversations between Lord Byron and Shelley, to which I was a devout but nearly silent listener. During one of these, various philosophical doctrines were discussed, and among these the nature of the principle of life, and whether there was any probability of its ever being discovered and communicated. They talked about the experiments of Dr. Darwin. I speak not of what the doctor really did or said, but as to my purpose, what was then spoken of as having been done by him. Dr. Darwin, in this case, is Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, right, who was a statesman and a poet, but he wrote extensively about the concept of life, and he did expostulate on the idea of evolution before Charles Darwin came up with evolution through natural selection. Mm-hmm. Okay, hang on here. Okay, someone preserved a piece of vermicelli in a glass case till by some extraordinary means it began to move with voluntary motion. Not thus, after all, would life be given. Perhaps a corpse could be reanimated. Galvanism had given token of such things. Perhaps the component parts of the creatures might be manufactured, brought together, and endued with vital warmth.
The study of the physics of electromagnetism was in its absolute infancy at this time. This is when Mary is writing this, your Michael Faraday is doing some of the very earliest demonstrations with using mainly static electricity. By this time, they had created the Leyden jar, which were the earliest batteries. But really, basically, all they're doing is shocking each other. They had not really figured out how to generate a current. They just knew how to make a circuit and shock each other with this static electricity. They were just basically learning how to measure it and control it. So the idea of the spark of life being an actual electronic current may or may not be. In the two versions of the book I have read, he talks about the spark of life, but there is no mention of lightning. There is no mention of electricity. There is no mention of any of that. In fact, the discussion, he talks about he can barely see in the room because there's only half a candle burning, which basically tells me it's not like in the movies with all the VU meters and the sparks and it's alive sort of stuff, and it was more chemical and alchemical than it was, I think, electronic.
But in the response, yes, galvanism is mentioned by Mary in her introduction, the very concept of it. We need to go ahead. I mean, most of us sci-fi geeks, and I consider this a science fiction story because of Stanley Schmidt's definition.
Actually, it is considered the first science fiction novel.
Science fiction, Stanley Schmidt was the editor of Amazing Stories magazine, and his criteria for what qualifies as a science fiction story is a story in which some element of science, technology, or future endeavors is so central to the plot that the storyline could not be told without it.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and many science fiction writers ended up being prophets because some of the things, you talk about Jules Verne and things like that. I'm glad that Mary Shelley's
was not
science fiction version was not realized.
Actually, it might have influenced some of the reasons why we have a lot of fears about cloning and stuff like that. Okay, should we talk? I mean, I know that many of our audience is familiar with the backstory on the creation of Frankenstein and the villa at Lake Geneva. John, how much do you know about Mount Tambora? Do you know that part of the story?
Well, as I admitted to you before we started the stream, I read the book maybe 30, 35 years ago and did not make it through the rest of it prior to this. Made it all the way through it prior to the stream. And the only thing I know about Mount Tambora is the words that just came out of your mouth. So
Okay.
Go on, Jerry.
Okay. And the picture. If any of you, if you get a chance, by the way, John, you can scroll through our live chat. Somebody recommended a really good audiobook version of it, which apparently is quite strong. And, if you ever driving around in that.
Oh, and also, last year was the 200th anniversary, and the Library of Congress and the British Museum had a reading of the book. They got people together to just sit there and read, and it was a marathon. They went for like 38 or 40 hours. It was wonderful to listen to. Anyway, Mount Tambora.
This is Mount Tambora. It is in, I believe, northeastern Indonesia. It is a 14,000-foot high mountain. On April 5th, 1815, Mount Tambora produced the largest volcanic explosion recorded in human history. Yep, that was it. The big one. Nothing's ever come close. St. Helens, Krakatoa, no. Tambora filled the sky with ash for 2 years.
And an especially high cloud of sulfur dioxide. Way up in the upper atmosphere, so high, in fact, that it was very hard, almost impossible to see. But the wind currents carried the ash and carried the sulfur dioxide all the way around the world, so that it erupted in 1814. By 1815, 1816, we had in Europe what was called the summer without the sun.
Winter without the summer.
The
year without a summer.
The year without the summer, yes, that was it. In which crops did not grow properly. There was huge climate problems, and it ruined several couples' vacation on Lake Como.
No, Lac Lemon, Lake Geneva.
Lac Lemon? Okay, all right. Anyway, it ruined 4 people's vacation on the lake.
Okay.
In fact, they were there to take in the sun. They spend the whole time inside, unfortunately, having to read books, and they were reading bad German horror novels to each other, and they decided to write their own. So the 4 people in the
I got a picture of the house here. It's coming.
It's okay.
All right.
So the 4 people: Percy Bysshe Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley.
Actually, she was just Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin at this time. They were not yet married.
And Lord Byron. And who was the woman with Lord Byron?
Okay. We're going to have to. This is a complex story, and we're getting into a lot of weeds here. Mary was the daughter of William Godwin, who was the author of a philosophy known as anarchy. He wrote a book
called Political Justice.
Thank you, Political Justice. Mary's mother was quite possibly the first feminist in the history of the world.
She was an interesting woman by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft. She had multiple affairs, had children out of wedlock. She had...
and just on that, as you're talking about that, there's a question about that from the live chat. Trevor Lunn asks the Griffiths, any reflection in the book of Mary Shelley's mother's history of relationships?
Okay, Mary's mother, her father, William Godwin, a critical philosopher, but he preached a concept called free love. And he argued that both men and women should have sex as much as they want with whomever they want. Mary Wollstonecraft embraced this. She and, they had something called the Johnson Circles in London at this time. So they went to these dinners. Anyway, they went to these dinners where you had presentations from Aaron Burr,
Tom Paine,
Talleyrand, Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
Godwin once complained he went to the dinner to hear Thomas Paine, and he wound up talking to Mary Wollstonecraft. But anyway, so Mary
Wollstonecraft was a well-known writer at this time. She had survived through the French Revolution and had written commentary on the rights of man and citizen, answering Edmund Burke's work.
No, it was Talleyrand. Talleyrand wrote...
Talleyrand, okay.
Okay, the rights of man and citizen. But she wrote a book called Vindication of the Rights of Women.
Right. So she will write one of the very earliest feminist manifestos and become extremely famous for it. But she was considered an extraordinarily scandalous woman and lived with Godwin and had one child out of wedlock. They finally married a few months before Mary was born. But sadly, Mary Wollstonecraft died just days after Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin was born.
So Mary, later known as Mary Shelley, spent her life idolizing her mother.
Yes, her father, William Godwin, had written a book, a tell-all book about everything that had happened between them and told a lot of the story of Mary Wollstonecraft's life. So it was all available, warts and all.
Warts, I mean, basically by our standards, so she...
Yeah, but it was extraordinarily scandalous. It got Godwin kicked out of all sorts of clubs, etc.
So Mary decided that she did not like the way society was going, thought everybody should have rights. So she moved to Paris during the French Revolution. One of the authors of the French Revolution central document was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And if you look into this, the French Revolution, they were terrible feminists. They embraced getting rid of slavery because they said free rights for all men. But Talleyrand...
Stop. Robespierre...
Okay. Sorry.
Robespierre ended slavery in the French colonies.
Mm-hmm.
It was reinstated by Napoleon.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Anyway, so one of the philosophers talked about the role of women and that there was no need for education of women. Mary went over there and
Mary
Wollstonecraft could not keep her mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
She was arrested and probably would have been executed. But she managed to get to some official and she said, I'm married to an American. She wasn't.
She wasn't. She lied about that. The American happened to be a gun runner who was smuggling all sorts of things under the cloak of being an American. So why not smuggle Mary Wollstonecraft as well?
So the soap opera of this early life is complex. Short version of where we were going with the other characters at the Via Dorati was that...
in the Year Without a Summer,
which led to famines all over the world. Anyway, after the death of Mary Wollstonecraft, William Godwin wanted a family for his... wanted some woman to do the cooking and cleaning.
Yeah. He wanted a more established family, and so he remarried. And there was a lot of friction between Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, the daughter, and her new stepmother.
Her new stepmother was something Claremont. I can't remember her first name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is, she had another daughter, who was the woman that William Godwin married, had a daughter from a previous marriage.
Mhm.
This woman was known as Claire Claremont. She was apparently quite attractive. She and Mary, the author of Frankenstein, were very close friends. But while traveling in Europe, they ran into this gentleman by the name of George Gordon, Lord Byron,
Right.
who became utterly infatuated with
Claremont.
And they had a child together. Anyway, so the point is, we were back at this house on the lake in Switzerland. So they went on a trip,
A vacation.
a vacation. Actually, I believe they were trying to run away from the family because the family was being very harsh.
Yeah.
Because Mary had run off with Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley was
a poet and was from a wealthy family, but had been kicked out of the family and kicked out of Oxford because he wrote a pamphlet about atheism
and the importance of atheism.
But he
was often told, you can come back to Oxford if you will disavow this publication.
Right.
To which he said, yeah, right.
Yeah. But he was a huge fan of William Godwin and introduced himself to Godwin and became one of Godwin's disciples because he really appreciated Godwin's work on anarchy.
This soap opera is
And
more
political-
complicated than the story
yeah,
of the novel.
yeah,
I didn't realize that.
political-
Sorry.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
When Percy Shelley falls in love with Mary Godwin Wollstonecraft and they run away, Mary has a baby with him and that baby dies. But Shelley is already married. Percy Shelley is already married and already has kids. And so he has left a wife behind in order to run off with the 16-year-old Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin.
Who he first...
What?
They first have sex on her mother's grave, according to legend.
No, no. She liked to read on her mother's grave, but I don't think they had sex on her mother's grave. Anyway.
Okay, so where was I? Lord Byron was at this point a rock star.
Right.
He was a poet, and everything he wrote was just a huge hit.
And he had money.
He had some money. He didn't have a lot. He had problems getting his hands on it because it was still family fortune.
Right.
George Gordon, Lord Byron, terribly influential, rented this cabin in Switzerland.
Right.
For the summer. Mary and Percy and Claire show up on his doorstep.
Hello.
Hello! Lovely cabin you got here. Would it be a shame if it was to rain all summer long? Which it did. And, okay.
So this becomes a contest of who can write the scariest novel.
Yes, they're sitting there on a cold, rainy day, and they're debating who can write the scariest novel. Now, curiously, Byron was already married as well, but his wife basically said, he's becoming really crazy. He's drinking too much. She would have said abusive, but they didn't use that term. So Byron was traveling with this gentleman. This is John Polidori, Byron's personal physician, who kept a diary of their time together. Anyway, so he was there during this conversation when Byron says, why don't we all try to write the scariest story we can?
Mm-hmm.
You want to keep going?
And so Mary's having a very difficult time telling the story, but she had spent her childhood in William Godwin's home. And Godwin's home was open to some of the more interesting and influential thinkers of the time, especially scientists like Erasmus Darwin and various others. So she had been privy to a lot of interesting discussions. She also credits the author of the poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
Samuel Coleridge. He was also part of the Johnson Circles.
He was also part of the circle. She claims that she was hiding behind the couch listening as Coleridge gave his first recitation of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
And if you remember, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is about a man burdened down by the sin of something he has done, and he cannot escape it.
Deeply regrets it. So she's putting all of this together. She claims in her introduction that she has a dream, that she sees the creature, and that animating a reanimated corpse or something brought to life. And it scared her so much. That was the impulse for her writing down the book and using all of these different little bits and pieces of her life, things that she had read, the Coleridge poem, snippets about electricity and galvanism. And all this is kind of feeds beautifully into her book.
Okay.
Do you have something to read?
I have a little bit to read, but this is actually coming up a little bit. I have a description about the contest. Mary felt she couldn't come up with an idea. Her husband, Percy, had this weird vision of women who had eyeballs on the ends of their breasts. And it freaked people. What? Got some reaction out of that one.
Wake up.
Yes, that was part of his thing. As he started trying to write a story about this, and it just freaked people out when he went there.
And Byron was writing about vampires.
Byron, John Polidori came up with an idea of a woman who had a skull for a head. Byron scribbled down some ideas about this Middle Eastern tradition of vampires, to which Polidori, his physician, said, "I like that. Let me take that." And so the other thing that came out of this discussion is not only Frankenstein, but the first vampire novel, which is called The Vampire, Vampyre, by John Polidori. You can read it online now. It's not quite Dracula, but it is very creepy, very supernatural. It's about a man who dies, but to stay alive, he sucks the energy out of young women. Okay. And there's virtually no question that it's based on Byron. Almost everybody agrees that it's based on Byron, sucking the energy out of young women to keep himself young and crazy and having no regard for their well-being.
Anyway, so Mary goes on to write this novel. She spends, 2 years writing it?
Well, it's not entirely clear because this was in 1816. The novel is first published in 1818.
Right.
If you've ever written a novel, you know that it takes
a huge amount of time.
A couple of years to go through and clean it up afterwards and get something presentable out of it. Which is why when critics said, "There's no way an 18-year-old girl wrote that," no, but a 21-year-old woman probably did.
Right.
Because
and no one questioned the authorship of Percy Bysshe Shelley's work. They all thought it was genius, and he was only
24.
2 or 3 years older than she was. So the idea of a young woman and a young man, come on. There were a lot of tongues wagging about the production, the first publication of the book, because it was published without an author being listed, and it had an introduction by Percy Bysshe Shelley.
And it was dedicated to William Godwin. You probably could have figured out who wrote the book.
Yeah,
but the publishing without an author on the title page was not at all uncommon in those days.
Yes, we don't have to look it up, but Sir Walter Scott published Ivanhoe
around the same time.
About the same time, and his cover did not have the name Sir Walter Scott on it. So
one of the critics, and this is something I think is okay. By the way,
that's the wrong book. Jerry.
That's all right. Okay. This is the most popular author of the time. This is a picture of Anne Radcliffe, who, what I'm saying is women authors were pretty common. There was another woman author at this time. This woman's name was Jane Austen.
Right. So there are critics that say, oh, they didn't put her name on it because she was a woman, or they didn't think that a woman could have written a book like this. Those kind of criticisms are not very strong.
But what I think is unusual is this is a novel written from the point of view of a man by a woman, which was probably not done.
Jane Austen didn't write from the point of view of men. She wrote from the point of view of women. So, and Anne Radcliffe, I've never read
her characters were
books.
women. Her characters were women. Her stories were basically, I call them the earliest Scooby-Doo mysteries. They were basically something supernatural happens but it turns out you misunderstood. It was not like that at all. Which is, of course,
I can understand the incredulity at the time, though, because you mentioned all the woman authors that there were, but the subject matter of this book was much different than the subject matter of a lot of those writers.
Very brave.
And any of the other writers.
I have a quote here somewhere from Mary about, she basically said, I didn't want to write another book like that about the beauty of domestic life, which, okay, more power to you. There was a critic that came out shortly after the book was published. This was from a church-sponsored publication. The writer is, as we understand, a female, and this is an aggravation of that which is the prevailing fault of the novel. But if our authoress can forget the gentleness of her sex, it is no reason why we should, and we shall therefore dismiss this novel without further comment.
Whoops. Boy, was he wrong. But can we get into the divided criticisms?
Oh, sure. And can you talk about your classroom experience?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I assign this book to my History 102 courses every semester. The 102 course is the course that starts at the Scientific Revolution and goes to modern day. And this is the first book I have them read. Why read a fiction book? Well, because this book is so clearly a product of the Romantic era, and yet it's commentary on many other things that I find that students get a chance to read an interesting book. It's horror, so, it's wonderfully creepy that way. But this year I did a different sort of assignment in which I divided my class into framing teams, meaning that I came up with 5 different framing teams, and they had to read the book and create an argument based on their framing team. So I want to say hi, if I've got any of my students here. So hi to Team Romanticism, Team Industrial Revolution, Team Feminism, Team Enlightenment, and Team Science and Technology. So each of these groups had to create an argument based on the group. So it was a wonderful group work. They came up with some of the most amazing presentations, because they had to work this into a presentation and then argue their point in discussion groups. And it was so much fun to watch them, because they had worked so hard in their arguments that they were very confident and just went in and were able to make their arguments very, very clearly and wonderfully. And I was just so pleased with what they did. And some of the arguments they came up with were very,
things
very
you hadn't thought of, you
interesting.
said, yes.
So, yeah, some of them came up with wonderful arguments. But I just want to say that this reflects the idea that this novel can be looked at in many, many different ways. It's not just a horror novel. It's not just the first science fiction novel. It's not just a gothic novel, or not just a romantic novel. There are many, many different ways of looking at this novel, and that's what makes it so worthwhile.
But most of us, this is my own personal interpretation. One of the reasons why I love this novel is I think most people at some point in their life feel like the monster.
Right.
Nobody will talk to me. I can't share how I feel. I'm all alone. Nobody understands me.
The concept,
monster's born a teenager.
Yes,
Okay.
The monster. Yeah, the monster is a teenager who hasn't felt alienated like that. I think that is a very universal trait that she gave the monster. And of course, if you're looking at it from a feminist framing, the monster could be looked at as her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, a woman who was educated and educated herself and thought that she was every bit the equal of a man and was never allowed to be, and was hence alienated from the rest of society. My Team Industrial Revolution ran with the idea of the alienation of the workers, becoming less skilled because they're dealing with these giant machines, and so they are alienated from the means of production. Way to go, Marx. And definitely using these ideas of alienation, and Industrial Revolution put together. So yeah,
the ugly side of the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Man creates this ugly thing, which
and
is
it's
what the cities
strong-
had turned
and it's-
into.
Yes, and it is stronger and faster and crueler than anything that the humans could have created.
Was there a controversy at the time where they were burning the book because
I've never heard of.
No, I haven't heard of it. I've never heard of it.
I had heard that there was something about that there was a certain faction of people that were horrified by the book because of the idea of creating life, and
that was what Mary said why she loved the story, what she thought it was so horrendous, was creating life. This is I've got this quote. I am going to force you to listen to it.
Sure.
How supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavor to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. His success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would not remember where the second page of this is. Hope that left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing which had received such imperfect animation would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient experience of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains, looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. One of the, hang on here. This is from, Mary reissued the book in 1831. And she made some changes, which I personally think are better. Oops, I hear a little echo.
That was me. Sorry.
Right. You make mistakes too. But clearly she had been asked a lot, where do you get your ideas? Which is the question every author hates most, other than, will you please read my manuscript? Mm-hmm. So I was adding some details after the fact. This is after the book was already somewhat popular. But no, John, I never heard of any public burning of the book or anything like that. It was, of course, Victor is horrified by the idea of creating life.
Once he does it.
Once he does it.
He's determined to do it. In many ways, Mary is warning us about science and what it could possibly do. My students came up with some really good discussions about current biomedics and bioethics, and that we have all of these ways to try to keep from doing crazy stuff in science, but there's no guarantee there aren't people out there doing crazy stuff in science. Mm-hmm. And the idea that just because we can do it, should we do it? That's really one of the big questions we have to ask about Victor Frankenstein. Just because he could do it, why did he do it? And why then, after he did it, did he abandon it? And then why couldn't he kill it? So many questions about him.
But at this time, I don't know if we even covered this, during the soap opera of Mary's life, Mary's father basically kind of cut them off, kind of wanted very little to do with them because she had run off with a married man, and this was something shocking to the reputation of.
Isn't that odd that he cut her off over that when he was basically a proponent of polyamory?
Exactly.
Yep.
I'm not sure it was polyamory in the modern sense, but he certainly was a proponent of do what you want. I think of polyamory as multiple relationships as opposed to just sleeping around.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
love them and leave them. Type.
Exactly. Okay. How are we doing? Have we covered almost everything?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of arguments that you could make. One of my favorite arguments is the argument about the Enlightenment, because the Romantic period was such a reaction to the Enlightenment. You could look at Victor Frankenstein as the pioneer of Enlightenment, that he is the man who uses reason and rationale to create this monster, to create life. And he does it from his own admission number one, to be a benefit to mankind, but number two, he wants that glory. He wants to be acknowledged as the creator of life, the father of a new race. And that Mary creates the creation as the birth of the creation of the Enlightenment, something that could only be formed by Enlightenment principles, that he's born a tabula rasa, as John Locke, who was one of the leading thinkers of the Enlightenment, would talk about, and that he has to learn everything. The Enlightenment idea was that humans are born blank slates and everything is about nurture, not nature, because humans are, don't have instincts and stuff.
But there was also this Enlightenment rationalism, and you kind of covered this, that says we can figure this out, as opposed to this romantic, stop, think about what you're doing, think about where this is going. Now,
and Walton, the captain
of the Polar Expedition,
is the audience going through, and I'm going to go back to Greek tragedy here, but that was also big in the Enlightenment period. He's going through the cathartic experience that the tragic audience would have. The whole point of watching a Greek tragedy where the protagonist is brought down low by his own hubris was that the audience could share in this, what's happening, and could go through this cathartic experience and not have to go through the pain and hardship of actually getting killed.
And Sarah Michelle, who's in the live chat, and I put her comment up a little bit ago. She had mentioned in there that to her the book is a Greek tragedy.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Very much so. And Mary would have read lots of Aeschylus and Sophocles. Definitely. I mean, you could crack it open as a Greek tragedy as well. That's what's so fun.
Oh, by the way, Trevor Lunn, you win.
You win. Trevor wins. Yep.
Oh, Percy. Here, let me put it up.
Mary's Bish.
Okay.
That's
there are
puntastic.
I want to touch on something real briefly, which is there have been controversies since the time of the books being published over, did Mary really write this or did Percy write this? And there is a new edition being published that has been published that's called, which says by Mary Shelley and Percy Bysshe Shelley. Now, I personally think it's crazy. Yes.
Well, right, because why at that time it wouldn't have been typical for a man to allow a woman to take credit for his work, would it? I mean,
I don't know. But the point is, it's like he was an experienced poet. He went through her manuscript. We actually have samples in their handwriting where he made suggestions and additions. However, I went through your dissertation. I don't see my name on the front of it. I don't think
you're in the acknowledgements, for crying out loud.
All right. But the point is,
dedicated it to you.
Going through and making suggestions does not make him the author.
No.
Right. Yeah.
Oh. Can we talk about how Frankenstein broke some taboos? Tom mentions before that you had the handling of dead bodies. Yes, that was a huge taboo for a long time. For most cultures, there was one culture, in fact, that did not have that as a taboo, and that was the Egyptians.
Okay,
mummies. Anyway, so he's being in charnel houses, taking months to sew these pieces of animals together, pieces of people together. He also
how would it smell when it was done?
Oh, I know. During summer, Frankenstein also talks about how he tortured dogs in order to make this thing work. Yeah,
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's a very, very throwaway sentence.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, that's gross.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So many taboos are broken in this novel. Even to the point of Frankenstein knew how all these people were being murdered, and he could not bring himself to stop it by admitting he had done something wrong, that he had broken a taboo. Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin Shelley realized how strong an emotion shame was. And during her time, during the Romantic era, shame was really, really, really pivotal. You could get people to do a lot of stuff because of shame.
Still can.
Yeah, still can. Still can.
So, and on the subject of taboos, I mean, I find that interesting because in a lot of ways, Mary Shelley and her father, many of the things that they, believed and adhered to were taboo to society at the time. Mary's an atheist. Some of the ideas that her father had, about, as you put it before, sleeping around and all that. So
one of the other things, Mary's father, he created the notion of anarchy as a political movement, which does not necessarily mean violence, but he used to get into big public arguments with a gentleman by the name of Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus was this Enlightenment era economist who basically said, if you give the poor more money, they're going to make more babies. And therefore you will always have more poor. Doesn't matter what you do. So don't give the poor money. Screw them.
Well, okay. It was Malthus who said our increases in agriculture will increase mathematically. However, the increases in the birth rate always go up geometrically. In other words, we're in trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
However,
eat the rich. No, we didn't.
Godwin said maybe it doesn't have to happen that way. Maybe we'll get some. Maybe we'll get really radical improvements in agriculture. Maybe you'll reach a time when people are happy to amuse themselves intellectually rather than just screwing all the time. And curiously, Godwin was right. We have found that as the economy improves in cultures around the world, population growth slows rapidly. It's a bizarre phenomenon because basically Malthus said, "You're stupid." But
hey, so I'm sorry. Go on. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I think I basically covered it there.
From the live chat, Cajun Drifter asks, is curious to know what the church's reaction to the creation of life, that was, in the telling of that story.
I'm not familiar with any church reactions to the novel.
No, I'm not. I'm afraid I'm not either.
Except, of course, that because he has regret, I'm not sure they would be that bothered by it, except for the fact that it's impossible. And to the church, it's impossible because only God can make life. To the rest of us, it's impossible because life doesn't work that way.
Right. Now, I've got a handful of questions. Yeah, from Sarah Michael.
It's okay to. Yeah, that's what I was going to do. Is I was going through right now and trying to find the question.
I don't know, Sarah. There is a Sarah Michael. There is a website that is housing Mary Shelley's manuscripts. The actual manuscript has been of the Frankenstein has been digitized and it's online. And I'll see if I can get you that. But you also have a question a little bit later about Vinci experimenting with corpses. I love it. She's doing a great job. But Da Vinci, yes. He and Michelangelo both snuck into charnel houses late at night with candles and drew and actually did autopsies on corpses. Now, of course, in the case of Michelangelo, he's looking for skeletal structures. He's looking for muscles. He's trying to figure out how to make a human sculpture look perfect. Da Vinci is not only doing the skeleton and the muscles, he's cutting into the heart. His diagrams of the heart, of the valves, of whatever is going on in there are absolutely beautiful. But you don't need to know how to draw a heart in order to paint the outside of the body. So his curiosity really, I think, got the best of him. But that's an interesting question. I'm way off topic.
You are off topic. Is there evidence that Mary made suggestions or added notes to Percy's writings? I haven't seen any, but I'm afraid people weren't looking for them as much. It's like, well, of course Percy wrote,
So I'm just looking here, and if anybody has any questions, please post them now. And so, where are we at as far as the subject matter you wanted to cover? Is there any other topics?
I think we're pretty well done. The issue that we've got, it's like we didn't answer whether this is a novel about hubris or stay in your lane or feelings of isolation or feminism, because it's about all of these things, and I think we kind of agree. Now, I would point out,
okay, I found
female characters are a little bit weak in this.
Okay,
they are passive.
If you're looking for her manuscript and a lot of really good information, the Shelley Godwin Archive
.org.
Okay.
So Shelley Godwin has got a hyphen between them. That's an excellent site. There's also a very good site called it's a blog, an extensive blog called Mapping Frankenstein, where the author of the blog goes through all of the different places and has pictures and maps, and it's really quite fun to look at.
So, you referred to, and I saw it online, or actually not online. You tweeted about this prior to the stream, and just mentioned a moment ago that William Godwin could possibly be considered the world's first feminist, but they wouldn't have called it that back then.
No, the term did not exist back then. No.
Yeah,
nope,
and nope. So it's just in his writings and the things that he espoused that we can de facto attach that label to him. Then,
correct.
Yeah, it's important to know that a man at the time writing that women should be treated equally and be educated and stuff like that was a rarity. We're talking Godwin, we're talking John Stuart Mills, really? Just a very small handful of men at the beginning of 19th century. By the end of the 19th century, of course, it's something different. You've definitely got the women have fought and won for their own place, fought for the franchise, the right to vote, etc.
Why do you think it is that? Because I asked a couple people who I know who are very interested in philosophy and much more learned in it than I am, and know many of the great philosophers' works, and a couple of them. But I asked, they had never heard of William Godwin. Why is he not better known?
He is in most. Go to a philosophy blog and you'll find it. He's pretty much up there.
Okay.
Honestly, he's not that famous by modern standards, but I think he's doing just fine.
Well, he's writing at a time, of course, during the entire Age of Enlightenment. He's up against Rousseau and Locke and
Burke. Mary Wollstonecraft and Burke used to really get into each other. Yes.
So maybe he's he was a little bit lost in the crowd then. Maybe.
Oh, and you've got Hegel, you've got Schopenhauer.
You've definitely got John Stuart Mill, and you've got David Ricardo at the same time.
And Hobbes is a little bit earlier. So I'm just going through my mental picture of all of these philosophers at the time, or the philosophes, as the French like to call them.
She spoke French.
It's like, wow, they're just churning stuff out like crazy.
One
of the hallmarks of the Age of Enlightenment was the addiction to coffee. These guys are reading.
I know all about that here in the modern day. So I also saw that you mentioned all the people that Godwin and his daughter Mary and the family associated with, and all the philosophers and free thinkers of the time. I also saw that they were associated with Dickens.
I'm not familiar with Dickens. Wasn't part of that circle. Dickens was a little later.
Paine was.
William Blake was definitely part of that.
Oh yeah.
William Blake was definitely part of that circle. Dickens was, to my mind, just a little bit later.
Okay.
But no.
Anyway.
Sorry.
I may have misread that. I may be mixing up my my readings. Tom
has. Oh, we have that.
Did I lose the page here?
No, we've got a super chat.
Okay.
Let me find it here. Another one from the one from Quisa here. All right.
Yeah.
So Quiasa writes, so what does the panel think about the next incarnations of Frankenstein, like the Universal Flicks and Karloff?
I haven't seen them.
I've seen a few. I'm not that impressed.
Peter Boyle was a good Frankenstein.
That's young Frankenstein. My grandfather's work was to do.
Nice knockers. Thank you, sir.
Would you like a roll of the hay?
Oh God! Stop these! Stop.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's actually some more modern versions. There's an interesting version that was on Broadway and London's West End, where Frankenstein was turned into a two-man show, and the actors, one actor would play Victor Frankenstein and the other would play the creature, and then they'd switch the next night. So
I want to jump in on this for a second.
Emphasizing the idea of who's the monster.
I love movies. I've tried for years to get work in movies, but I don't think a movie does as good a job at getting inside your brain with new ideas as a novel does. And so I think, the new incarnations, that's great, but read the book, listen to the book on tape. To me, the amount of time you have inside somebody else's head in a book like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, and that's true in any book versus a movie, because when you read the book, then your mind has to do all the work. There's something about that process of visualizing it in your mind that makes it so much more of a better experience, and you do.
There's
get more
a famous quote, which I can't give you exactly, from Christopher Tolkien when they made the Lord of the Rings movies, who basically said, "I don't really approve of the movies because these books mean something different to every person as they read them." And the movies are great, they're beautiful, they're very artistic, but reading a book is a different experience.
You're sucked into it, and it's gratifying, like crazy.
And thank you so much, Quisa, for the super chat, Steve. Thank you.
Tom has another question. We now have defibrillators to bring people back to life, sort of. Was Frankenstein a genius prediction or pure fantasy at the time it was written? It's an interesting question.
A genius prediction?
Genius prediction?
Was it plausible at the time? Is that part of what you're saying?
What we didn't understand was the electrochemical process in the brain.
Okay.
Because the electricity had to come from somewhere. It comes from a chemical process in the brain. So it's like there were still a couple of steps away. The idea of the defibrillator, wouldn't Mary Shelley have gone crazy about that? But my mentor, Professor John Orens, when he talks about the Romantic period, and he talks about how they thought of life as opposed to the Age of Enlightenment, and this might give you something, Tom, as far as understanding of life. But he explains the Romantic period as this. Imagine you have a dog. You love your dog. You pet your dog. You feed your dog. You go throw your dog a stick. You have a wonderful time with your dog. But you get curious. What makes a dog tick? And so you cut the dog open. And you're able to see, oh, look, hearts, lungs, muscles, brain, bowels, all this. Okay, food goes in this end, comes out that end. But the Romantic would say, yes, you might now know what the inside of a dog looks like, but you have just destroyed what made it a dog. And that, to my mind, is what Mary Shelley would have said. It's all well and good to have all of this science, but what makes it a dog is something entirely different than just the electrochemical process.
This is a little painful for people like me who really think if I study something hard enough, I can understand it. And, but as opposed to this romantic concept of just accept it. Look, the Alps are beautiful. Here's my description of them. See, they're beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as I said, everybody who needs
Why
to.
are they beautiful? Look how the light reflects off that. Why is
Oh,
this
oh,
joke
oh.
funny? It's
Oh
the
no!
same.
Do not ever try to explain jokes that way. Sigmund Freud wrote a book called "Jokes and Their Relation to the Subconscious." I recommend not reading it ever. It's hideous. Imagine the earliest of German psychiatrists, or actually it's Austrian psychiatrists, trying to explain jokes. It's horrible.
By the way, before we wrap this up, would you show your?
We have more.
No, that's the same one.
We have another
That's the
super
same
chat.
one. That's the same one.
No. If I may ask one more, any future plans on handling Keynes, Leonard, and Virginia Woolf and their gang of intellectuals? Ooh.
Keynes? Which
Keynes?
Keynes? Not
John Maynard?
John Maynard.
You mean
Keynes?
John Maynard
Did
Keynes?
John Maynard Keynes hang out with Virginia Woolf? I had no idea there was a relationship there. Okay.
I don't know.
I mean,
I would love to do the Algonquin Roundtable.
Yeah. I am.
That would
John
be fun.
Maynard Keynes is fascinating to me because right now it's very hip for modern semi-conservative economists to poo-poo him.
To trash Keynes.
But the man invented the methods of measuring the economy that we still use. But I did not know he had any relationship with Virginia Woolf. Okay.
Yeah. No, I didn't know that.
Thank you so much, Quisa, for that. Steve, thanks you. Quisa in the live chat, making it rain tonight. Three super chats.
All right. Oh, by the way, don't forget to promote our channel. Would you please share your book with the camera?
Book?
Yes.
Oh.
How big is it?
Kind of a personal question.
This is the annotated Frankenstein.
Sorry.
I don't normally recommend selling books. I'm not a book salesman, but this has been really, really helpful as far as getting into the meat of the problem. They've done a really good job of going through it, but carrying it around, it's a little heavy. But yeah, that's the kind of meat that's in this book that you can really appreciate what's going on.
Okay. It is 8:22. Shall we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I was just going to, along the lines of what you just said a moment ago. Yeah, of course, the Griffiths channel is History Unsettled. If you're not, I will put a link to it in the description after I get done with my streams tonight. But definitely go over and check their channel out. There is just tons and tons of wonderful content over there. They're so dedicated to their content that they were on vacation a while back and saw some interesting things, and they pulled the camera out and did a few videos about it. Always a good time having them on. As Steve said early on in the stream, he posted in the live chat his favorite couple on YouTube. You guys are so, and I have to,
yahoos, yes.
yeah, and I have to concur with that wholeheartedly. This was a wonderful stream to have the night before Halloween, I chose my avatar because at the last minute I thought, well, I'm going to go up the store up the street and see if they've got a Frankenstein outfit. And I was going to try and be on camera with a Frankenstein mask on, but of course they were all sold out of all that kind of stuff. But the avatar worked well, and I didn't get to finish it prior to the stream, but after hearing you guys talk about it, I'm definitely going to have to go back and finish it. It's just so interesting to me how people don't know the story of the book because they've seen the movies, and and the movies don't do the book justice by any means at all. Her whole family, very fascinating too. That's worth looking into as well. What do you have coming up in the future here that you'd like to tell folks about?
Nothing in the works right now. We've been working on this show for a while. We actually do read ahead and study before we go on the air. We actually don't know as much as I try to make it look like we know.
So definitely, we've been wanting to put together a series on Rome,
but we haven't got our act together on that yet.
Yeah, we kind of put that on the side burners while we did the Frankenstein show, this Frankenstein show. So, but we wanted to do that for Halloween.
So now, when we first discussed about doing this stream, I think you were saying that maybe we could, make this kind of a repeating type thing. Like if I was to ask you right now, well, gee, what book should we do in the future, whether it be next month or a couple months from now or the first of the year, like what book do you think folks should maybe read?
Interesting question.
And if you haven't put any thought into it and don't have an answer now, you can, shoot me your answer in DMs or something later. But
this weekend, I have to go give a rundown on the life of Edgar Allan Poe from his gravesite, which should be fun.
Yeah, Jerry's leading a tour of in Baltimore of on important places about Edgar Allan Poe and
this is the
Francis
gutter.
Scott Key. This is the gutter where they found Edgar Allan Poe, almost dead of alcoholism.
Great. Trevor Lund says, great and interesting stream. Jerry is the one with the beard, I assume.
She is not a beard.
Ow! Anyway, yeah, and I'm running into the end of my middle of my semester, so I'm going to be in depth with lots of student stuff, which is
another historical book to discuss from the that's an interesting concept.
Well, if anyone's got any decent any ideas,
you're a mind reader, because I was just going to say, yeah, if people in the audience have any suggestions, leave a comment under the video of what historical novel you would like to hear the Griffiths talk about in the future, and we'll work something out.
I can think of one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what?
All Quiet on the Western Front. No,
I don't know.
You don't want to do war?
I don't like. Everybody who does history loves talking about war and death and dying. I get kind of
Stranger in a Strange Land.
That's an interesting concept.
Okay, Steve McRae with the first suggestion from the chat.
What did he say?
Stranger in a Strange Land.
That was from Steve.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's unfortunately we're not. The monitor is forwarding. So, yeah. Click on the little blue. There you go.
Okay.
But yes,
Tolstoy. Someone wants to do War and Peace. I'll do War and Peace. That's my favorite.
War and Peace.
I would do War and Peace. I've read it about 6 times.
Really?
Right.
Yeah. I love that book. I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, let's do
Tolstoy
that.
is also a fascinating character because he was one of the first advocates of nonviolent resistance, an idea which probably came from Percy Shelley. And if you go to our channel and you watch the video on Peterloo, we talk about how Percy Shelley wrote a poem after the events at Peterloo in Manchester, which basically laid some of the groundwork for the idea of nonviolent resistance.
Yep.
Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake the chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few.
Yes.
Sorry.
So I think that when we do the War and Peace stream, I will have to not have a stream afterwards, because I think that one could turn into quite a lengthy discussion, actually.
Well, it can if you get into the details, but I think the stories within the story are not, you've got the cycle of Pierre, the cycle of the different characters.
Tolstoy wanted to write a Russian book, and he did
as
not
long
want
as the Russian winter.
And he didn't want to follow the conventions of the Westernizers, the Europeanists of the time. And so that's why his book comes out as differently as it can be. That's why it's so weighty and interesting a tone.
So I don't know whether Sarah Michelle concurs with me, or I ended up concurring with her and just saying it after she had already posted it. Yeah, 10-hour stream to cover War and Peace, she says.
Trade off so people can sleep. Okay. Tale of Two Cities is one of my favorites. It's a little overwritten, but
that's me.
That's you. Got to get ready for your next show?
No, well, actually, that is the alarm that goes off every night to remind me to call or head over to my mother's and remind her to take her medication.
Oh, you're such a good son, John.
Jerry, Notre Dame de Paris.
Oh, yeah.
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Oh yeah,
I love
Yeah.
Victor Hugo.
We've got the next 6 months already lined up here. But yeah, I would say any one of those few that we just spoke of, we could do that.
I love that book.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So
All
let's wrap this up because we haven't had dinner yet.
Thank you so much for
Thank you
everyone in the
to our
live
lovely
chat.
studio audience. Yes.
Our
And,
live chat people who kept coming up with some awesome, just never Atlas Shrugged, with some awesome questions.
Agreed.
I wish we could, do some more of this.
Hey, do me a favor, live chat. Any of the suggestions you put in the live chat, please, after this post is a video, put them in the comment section under the video, because I don't want to have to fish through the live chat again to find them. So, but a few of War and Peace I won't forget for sure.
And a big shout out to my 102 class.
Yes,
Oh,
to
yeah.
Mrs. class, who really made some very convincing arguments that I don't always agree with.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this up. I'm getting
Yeah,
tired. I got to get up early in the morning. John's got to go take care of his mommy.
And just let me say, after this at 9 o'clock over on a Raging Atheist, we have a panel, Sock Account, Barney Tearspell, Aaliyah Kai, and Nakasuchi's going to be there. We're going to talk about the Veil of Ignorance. Also want to point out on my channel, coming up next month, I am going to start doing a twice-a-month podcast called the Apostate Alliance. We're going to be talking to ex-Muslims. It's time that the ex-Muslims were brought into the fold in the skeptic community. And Faye the Most Gracious, whom a lot of you might know, has agreed to come on once a month and co-host that with me. And we will bring ex-Muslims on to tell their stories about leaving Islam. And I guess I lost the Griffiths there. Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. And be here next time.